For most of us, this really is the RPG MMO. Last time, I finished the story of Ossus, and I looked on at Legacy of the Sith's really very rocky launch. Well, it turns out I had a way to go. How much? Well, 10 hours of story content. Yep, that is what the slice of SWTOR's equivalent of the MSQ released between October 2019 and February 2022 took. Of course, the game did release more content than that, daily zones and things like that, but on the whole, it's not a humongous amount of story content, and in general, this game doesn't get massive quantities of content. So, was what I played good? Why did this whole situation happen? Did I actually even enjoy my journey? Well, let's start. A year after Ossus introduced Malgus's return, Anri and the excellent SWTOR system, Onslaught would release, and SWTOR would finally have itself a nice chunk of story. Here's the deal. The Empire has enough fuel to fly straight to Corellia and get their war on. The Republic don't. As a member of the Empire, I've got to harry them at every opportunity. As a SWTOR, I've actually got to fail to do that in a convincing fashion. It's a pretty damn fun setup that injects dialogue with far more intrigue, and more beyond just the unique SWTOR dialogue options. It's fun to be two-faced, acting all loyal to the Sith that you fully intend to betray, but Major Anri is fun. Perhaps a romance option. So, yeah, that's a good position for the SWTOR plotline to be in. And their decision to allow for SWTOR runs of both storylines is fantastic. Onderon, then, is our first planet, and it's gorgeous. This engine is old, some aspects are rough, but the art direction is really solid, and it does just come together. My story centers around duping a fool of a king who's facing a coup from his own family, aided by the Republic. So a perfectly easy to control man. I save him from assassins, accidentally take off all of Lana's clothes and then lose the UI to put them back on, rendering her stuck in underwear for a few hours, which was a little bit awkward, and then I proceeded to engage in a whole bunch of skullduggery on the planet. You see, we want control of their orbital defense cannons so that we can soften up the pubs. So, along with my Wookiee friend, I head out into the wilds, I fight beasts, I generally be deceptive, even rallying a traditionalist faction to our side, all culminating in a big cool raid on the Republic-backed faction settlement. Here the pace is brisk, the story's engaging, the characters are all fun. You can of course revel in being a member of the Empire and just kill so many of the named characters. Or not. There are plenty of little choices, all leading up to the big one. Do I carry out my duty, or do I destroy the cannons? Well, the controller for the cannon, failing my own mission and purpose. Of course, I do the latter. Being SWTOR is just so much more interesting to me. And that's it for Onslaught's first planet. Somewhat short, but fun. Next, it's Meksha, a outlaw asteroid that actually would prove to be shorter. Almost an hour on the dot. It was a good hour. I dealt with outlaws as I tried to sabotage the Republic's refueling attempts, just that of course, being a SWTOR, I'm actually sabotaging that plan, letting the Republic fleet escape, all while drinking in the extremely cool environment of Meksha. It's strange. This place is so nice to be in, it's just really cool, yet there's not a lot of story there. And I kept on thinking, okay, this is great, this is fun, but they really could have got more out of this if they wanted to. The planets do, of course, have other content, but it is odd that the story goes so brisk at this point. 2.5 hours after starting, and I'm ready for Onslaught's finale, which is the Corellia Flashpoint. Now, as much as a bit more spectacle would be welcome, I understand they have some engine limitations, and with that, Corellia is cool. We get a big space battle cinematic, a few cool choices, strategic bombardment and such, and then the actual Flashpoint itself, a big ground assault. Flashpoints are essentially dungeons in this game, just that they've got a story mode. Now, yeah, pack after pack of mobs does get dull, but overall, it's a neat system. The flashpoint is fun, the story is solid, Malgus and I fight a big fight, he gets wounded, and I of course sabotage the entire Empire plan, totally ruining their mission. Which, when you think about it, is actually a pretty damn big move. And that's the thing. It actually does feel like you change the story here. There's a payoff. I feel like I really did that. I think moments like that are modern Star Wars: The Old Republic at its best. So, while short, Onslaught was a blast. It was fun. It was a nice slice of my favorite Star Wars setting with fun characters. After that, things get a little strange in how you play them now. You get breadcrumb quest after breadcrumb quest, though there's times where you do them back to back, even though evidently a decent span of time has passed. That's just what it's like when you're playing this stuff after the fact. But it's all setting up the two main storylines, the Mandalorian storyline, and then the Kira/Scourge duo, dealing with, of course, Tenebrae. Of course, you've seen him as Valkorion in the Fallen Empire Eternal Throne storyline. And that latter story is just brilliant. I don't want to give it away too much, just know it was a great hour and a half that had a really, really cool final area. It was just brilliant, super satisfying end to that storyline. I'm glad they pulled that one off. As for the Mandalorian stuff, honestly, didn't really care. Malgus, well wounded, he wasn't dead, and worse for the Empire, he then went missing. Malgus, of course, is a powerful ally, but a worse foe, and with the kill switch that was installed in him, disabled, we've got to work out what's going on. So, I go to Dantooine with Rivix and Krovos, who are a really fun duo of Sith. It's basically a big flashpoint with quite fun lore. So at this stage, really, I'm in the groove. I'm having a pretty great time. So, it's time to start Legacy of the Sith, the game's latest expansion. Onslaught was brisk. Legacy of the Sith, though? Well, the new Manan storyline takes 90 minutes. There's a roughly hour-long flashpoint after that, so I suppose 2.5 hours in total versus the 3.5 hours of Onslaught on its launch, with of course quite a bit more content through its patch cycle. So it's not looking great for Legacy of the Sith. What I will say though is, I'm back with Major Anri. The story continues in the strong form that I have come to expect from the game. And yes, on the Empire side, you're there with Anri, who's just one of the more fun characters, being a little bit more, just kind of not a weird Sith person. Basically, Manan has resources. We want him. We don't want the Republic to have him. Simple enough, really. Throw in a questionably competent Imperial and another lunatic Sith, and it is a nice, solid slice of SWTOR story. The usual strengths apply, and with a final kiss, the Anri situation is heating up. Which then makes me wonder, how are the writers going to have her deal with my character being a double agent? Yeah, Saboteur is the way to go. There's just so much more intrigue. And that's the journey, actually. That is the journey. Next, then, I want to talk about pros, cons, how this happened, and what I would actually recommend to you. Well, now that you know my experience, I just want to talk about a few pros and cons. This is hardly a review of the game, just things that have came to my mind. Alright, characters. They continue to be well written and well performed. A lot of them are just fun, and I think that's kind of a benefit of rolling Empire and just having weird Sith people. Production values are also pretty high for the conversational content. It's all, engaging, as I suppose a Star Wars BioWare RPG should be. Then, the Old Republic era. It still is one that I feel quite drawn to. I kind of think it's the best era of Star Wars, to be honest, so I just like spending time here. And then, as a story, what I played was engaging enough. Plenty of different locations, cool things to do. It was totally worth my time. Not just throwaway MMO leveling. It was actually story to do in a game. Now for some of the less positive things, class gameplay I think is just okay. I think in a world where FF14 is doing what it does, and World of Warcraft is doing what it does, this just doesn't really compete. Of course, if you want stuff themed around Star Wars, this is your only option, and it's a good enough one at that, but I don't think it's a game I'm going to be playing for the incredible sort of gameplay fun. Now, the new expansion also did have a few bugs. I found that performance was oddly bad on the planet of Manaan, and the UI revamp is honestly often hideous. I don't understand why they made it so painful on the eyes, and there are times where it does kind of feel like they pad out the length of the content by just throwing waves of enemies at you. You know, I'd even be happier if this game had a near FF14 ratio of combat to conversation. That would totally play to the game's strengths. At least all of the Sith plotting and all the skullduggery, it's really fun. But perhaps they just don't have the budget to actually do that. So it's odd to see a BioWare game with the Star Wars IP of all feel this, well, sparse. What I played was great, but what I played today did come out over a 2 1/3 year span. So, as we try to work out what's going on with this game, well, let's take a look at the recent history. Anthem released in January 2019. It was an unmitigated disaster, and part of the plan with that game is that BioWare Austin would help in a major way. They're the same studio that handles Star Wars The Old Republic, so after co-developing, they'd of course be helping out with the live service aspect of the game, which would make sense. Of course, they'd been running an MMO for years. Anthem's limp start and total mess around the first Cataclysm event soon scuppered those plans, leading to a project to reboot Anthem, and that project was going on, I believe, mostly in BioWare Austin. They essentially wanted to pull off a No Man's Sky. Well, they didn't. That project lasted until February 2021, when its cancellation was announced. Now the thing is, Legacy of the Sith was supposed to come out December of that year, but it was of course pushed back to February 2022. Now I'd say that's because the public test server revealed bugs, but many, dare I say most of the bugs from the PTS actually made it to launch. So, it was delayed, it was still a mess on launch, all while the studio had Anthem fail, and then of course the project to save Anthem be cancelled. So no wonder Legacy of the Sith has been messy. Now Onslaught likely was not safe either. You see, the Old Republic pushed heavily into story content with 2015 and 16's Fallen Empire and Eternal Throne. Those were pretty large narrative expansions that released back to back. I mean, think about that content cadence. That was a lot of stuff. But things would only slow down from there. New content did release, but the pace was kind of slow, actually. It took from 2016 to the end of 2019 to release Onslaught. The content that I did in the previous SWTOR video on this channel was at the end of 2018. It was then a full year before Onslaught happened. Now, I can't know this stuff for sure, but the slowdown in SWTOR sure does seem to coincide with Anthem. I don't want to get too conspiratorial, but think about Anthem. Its 2017 E3 demo was not exactly representative of a fully made game they had? Definitely not. The game essentially had been rebooted into its final direction around that time. I think they actually changed its name to Anthem like weeks before that E3. They even had t-shirts printed of its old name, which I think was Beyond or something. So, from 2017 to 2019 for Anthem was almost certainly an all-hands-on-deck situation. I cannot confirm anything, but it does feel like SWTOR got caught up in that mess. And I've got to wonder if BioWare Austin is still getting back on its feet. I mean, they've likely experienced a lot of brain drain, that's for sure. Now, perhaps a glimmer of hope, as I recently saw, they do have a Fairview job opening, so I suppose that could be a good thing. Now, to be fair to them, the content that I played after Anthem's release, the stuff made and released in that period, has been great. It's just that the quantity hasn't really been there. It's certainly not enough to compete with other narrative-driven MMOs in the market, like, say, the 4-month major patch release schedule of FF14. Now, do you want a recommendation? This might all seem mixed, but I can tell you that in spite of all of this, I do wholeheartedly recommend The Old Republic, especially if you haven't played it. The 8 origin stories are, I think at the very least, solid, with many of them being fantastic. Sith Warrior, as an example, is brilliant, so there's just so much content there. And then the expansion stories are also great. Revan sees you meet characters who will become important later, and then the whole Fallen Empire Eternal Throne story is just excellent. Then, of course, what I did today was 10 hours of enjoyable story content. All of that is easily worth the cost of admission, which I suppose is free, but I would just say subscribe. It's just not worth being gimped by the free-to-play stuff, and all those expansions and all that content is included in the sub. I mean, even if you play the game for 3, 4, or 5 months to go through all of this story content, it would still be a pretty amazing value for how much stuff you actually get. Now, Onslaught onwards, of course, does have replayability as well. I mean, at a stretch, you could do Loyalist and SWTOR for each side, but more realistically, there is the core Republic and Empire storyline. So if you're doing that with 2 characters, yeah, make it more like 20 hours if you want to do both. So, SWTOR is not the game that has it all, but what it does have, I think, is pretty great. You could do a lot worse. And I'm not really even a Star Wars person. I mean, I like the first 2 movies. The prequels are, ideas, not execution. I think the sequels are mostly embarrassing. Episode 9 felt like, an unholy affront to the art of filmmaking. I can't believe they released episode 9, whatever. I only just watched it recently, and I knew it wasn't great going in, but holy shit, I've never seen it. It was a movie edited like a TikTok. Just don't let anything linger. Oh, I could talk about that thing for a while. It's just so incompetent. So point is, I'm not saying this from the perspective of being a franchise fanboy. In the same way that I went into FF14 mostly blind in that franchise and really did enjoy myself a tremendous amount, similar thing here. Not as much of it, not to the same degree. FF14, I think, is a cut above narratively, especially as you get towards its later, Heavensward and its Heavensward, Shadowbringers, Endwalker. Stormblood's got a lot of brilliant stuff, but you know what it's like with that. So I'm not going to say this is up there, but I will say that if you just want a big story in a game, this is a really good option. And certainly if you've enjoyed FF14 and you also like the Old Republic era, or at least it seems interesting to you, then it really is a no-brainer. Now, if you would like a guide through this story, not spoilers, but just where to go, what to do, because of course MMOs can be pretty overwhelming, then check out the SWTORista story order video. That one will get you sorted, so you won't be confused about where to go. As for me in this game, well, I'm at level 80 now. May as well see what the end game is. I just realized that they have ship fighting. I thought it was only the Star Fox style thing that the game shipped with that I remember from playing it back then. But no, it has actual flying around ships, which is totally up my alley. So, SWTOR endgame, I'm going to see what it is. I should have then my final SWTOR report for you next week, maybe the week after. Till then though, I hope you found this interesting. Take care.